what alcoholism is. It's a disease. It has a physical component, absolutely, but it also has a mental and emotional side. And the main problem lies between the two ears. It's in that mental and emotional side, but there is a physical component to it. The brain of an addict is much different from that of a normie. And the only solution that we believe in is having a complete psychic change brought about through a spiritual experience. So that's about alcoholism, and I talk a lot about it. And then I've talked a lot about the spouse of an alcoholic, and how they're affected, and then adult children of alcoholics. But I got to thinking the other day, I don't think I've ever talked about the children that are in the home that are, actually living in the disease. I don't know that I've ever done that, and I think it's really important to, and and I'm going to try not to just do it all, my own personal, but it's hard not to bring my own, experiences in here, because I'm on both sides of that. I was a child of an alcoholic, and then I grew up and I became a spouse of an alcoholic. And, on a certain level, children know, they realize that the alcoholic is sick. And my son would say, if he was here today, he would say, well, I don't think my dad was an alcoholic. I don't know, but we had a crazy mother. And, and it's true. He drank and I went nuts. And that's what happens. I went crazy trying to get him to quit drinking and trying to normalize everything in the house and make us look good out in the community and all of that. And so it's difficult for children to live in that environment. It's very difficult. And so the thing about it is what happens when children are raised in the disease of alcoholism or drug addiction, and I'll tell you, or any other addiction. Like my kids got it on both sides. I was a compulsive overeater, but I was also a rager. Their dad was a alcoholic, but he was a rager, and we brought that into our home. Now, we look good out in the community. We volunteered, we had a cute house, everybody liked to come to our house, and we could clean up long enough and be nice long enough to have company or go to church. We went to church every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I would be screaming and hollering and fighting with the kids. And so what I'm talking about is a lot of times children, little kids, live in total chaos when they live in the disease of alcoholism. And what it does, it brings a lot of fear to them. They learn to rage themselves or have temper tantrums. It's like they follow their parents in the parents' footsteps. They have a lot of fear. They live in chaos and instability. They have emotional neglect. You can have a parent a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad. And still, if one parent is alcoholic, what happens is the non-alcoholic, their focus is on the alcoholic. What he's doing or what she's doing, what we can do to sober him up. We're focused in the disease. We're focused on the alcoholic, and the alcoholic is focused on that next drink. And so there's a lot of neglect in the homes of alcoholics, and the neglect comes a lot from the non-alcoholic. Not just, like I said, kids have a way of kind of knowing that the alcoholic is sick, but what is wrong with this crazy person? And so, and you know, I want to cut some people a little slack. Maybe not everyone got as sick as I did. I don't know, but I, you know, was took care of my mother when she was, you know, growing up. And I lived with a rager. My father was a rager, and mother felt sorry for herself. So I picked up my father's rage and my mother's self pity, and that's not a very good combination, you know, because I'd rage and rage and rage, and then you know somebody would say something to me, and I would get my feelings hurt, and I'd get into self pity. So there's a lot of emotional neglect. There is abuse. There can be physical abuse, silence and secrecy. You know, what we call that silence, where we call it silent violence, where everyone knows in the household something is going on, but no one talks about it. And it's that silence, that's walking on eggshells. And children learn this at a very early age. To be quiet and to be secretive. You know, they'll hear things like, you know, Claudia Blight gave us these rules of adult children of alcoholics. You grow up and you learn not to trust, you know. And my dad would say, you can't trust anybody outside this house. Well, the ones that I couldn't trust were really inside the house, but he taught us, you know, that everything outside the house was dangerous. And, you know, so it's that silence. Some families get real silence, and we call that silent violence, where you're like walking on eggshells. Others are very loud. What I was talking about is the secrets, though. And we are as sick as we are secret. And a lot of children who live in alcoholism are taught to don't go to school and tell anybody what happened last night. You know, what happens in this house stays in this house. You know, I was interviewing when I was at the Serenity House. We had a guy come in. In fact, his wife brought him in, and she left and then came back the next day. I told her to come back the next day because we admitted him late one night, and I went up there and admitted him. That was back in my work addiction. But anyway, I told her to come back the next morning. She did, and she brought her children. There was a boy about 10, and there was a little girl about 4. And by that time, when I saw the mother that night, I didn't see any bruises on her. But when she came back the next morning, there was bruises on her face. There was on her eyes and all. They just hadn't shown up because he had just been hitting her, you know, her trying to get him in the car to come to treatment and all that. So if you really want to know the truth about what's going on in the family, ask a 4 or 5-year-old. They don't know to lie yet, you know. And so I was interviewing because we were mandated at the Serenity House. If we saw domestic violence, we were to call, you know, we were to, you know, turn the alcoholic in, you know, we'd get them sober through, you know, we'd detox them. But if there was domestic violence, we were mandated to call the police department. So I was interviewing, you know, just talking to the mother and the little boy and the little girl. And so I was asking the mother about the bruises, and she said, and the little boy spoke up, and he said, she fell. She fell down. She stumbled and fell and kept saying that, and the little girl looked up and she said, no, Daddy hit her. Daddy hit her. So if you want to know the truth, ask a 4-year-old. They don't know yet to lie. But that's what is one of the things about children living in the home. They learn early on to lie. Don't go to school and tell what's happening in this house. And so what happens is a lot of times children don't have the words to explain what's happening to them. You know, they don't have, you know, depending on the age, they don't have the words to say. But what they do have is the feelings, and it comes up in their bodies. It comes up in their behaviors, their emotions, and their nervous systems carry the weight of what they've experienced. If you want to know who's carrying the weight in an alcoholic home, the weight of the disease, it's the children living inside the home. They carry it. They carry the secrets. They know. If you really want to know what's going on in a household, ask the children. And like I said, the younger the better, because they don't know to lie yet. So children that live in dysfunction learn dysfunction, and it's carried on from one generation to the next. And what happens is, what they often do is, like I've already mentioned, they learn to walk on eggshells. They learn to stay quiet. Don't say anything outside this house. They become caretakers too soon. What this is about is, let's say you have a boy, 13, 14 years old. You know, it could be any age, but they're usually teenagers. And, you know, and so dad gets drunk, wants to fight, and, you know, or wants to argue with the mother, and the son steps in, and it could be the daughter, but I'm talking about the son right now. And he becomes he intervenes, and then he becomes like the dad goes off to treatment. Maybe he's gone 90 days, 6 months, whatever. He's gone, the father is. And the son will take over the father's duties. Like, he will begin to discipline the other kids. His anger will come out with his siblings. Another thing is, you know, if the mother's pretty sick herself, he will even take over paying the bills. The teenager will take over paying the bills. And he becomes like the man of the house. And the older they are, the more duties they take on. And so the dad comes home from treatment, and the son doesn't want to turn loose. He is used to running that household, and the mother letting him, and he doesn't want to turn it over to the dad. So there's already conflict there, you know. And a lot of times kids had rather, and this, as sick as it is, they'd rather have them in the disease than sober, because kids can get away with a lot when there is chaos in the family and the dad's drinking or the mother's drinking, you know. And so the kids can get by with a lot. And then, you know, it's not all just taking on roles. They'll take on roles. Like, I took care of my mother, and I took care of the house, and I paid the bills at the time I was 10 years old. I don't think when I left home, I don't know if the bank would even honor a check. She never wrote a check, you know. I mean, I did that because she wanted me to. And I'll tell you, children who are raised in dysfunction, and, you know, they take on too many jobs, and there is a part that feels good. I mean, you feel grown up, and you get to do things that's not age appropriate, and you go to school and try to tell your sibling, I mean, you know, if you have any friends in school, you try to tell another fifth grader that you drive the car to the grocery store at age 10. They don't believe you. They think you're making that up. Children who are raised in alcoholic homes do a lot of things that's not age appropriate because it's expected of them. So they get to believe also that they're the problem. And a lot of times the non-alcoholic will tell them, you know, if you would just act right, just do not upset your father because he will drink. Or if the mother's the alcoholic, you know, he will tell the kids, you know, y'all be quiet, y'all be good, you clean up the house, and then mama won't drink. Mama won't drink. So there's a lot put on kids, a lot put on them. If you don't believe me, if you haven't lived in a household like that, or if you haven't had children to live in it, you have no idea what it's like to live in active disease of alcoholism as a child. it's horrendous. It's horrendous. And then you go to school and try to play like everything's all right. Maybe you've been up all night, with the alcoholic, or you've maybe been up with the mom and dad fussing and fighting, and you've gotten between them. For years, years and years ago, uh, I was diagnosed with narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is where you just go to sleep. I'd be up at the chalkboard at the treatment center doing a lecture, and I would drop the chalk and go to sleep. I mean, just for an instant. I went to a sleep clinic up in Lubbock, and they would send me every year. And I was diagnosed with narcolepsy. And then I did not know, I knew on a certain level that I'd been sexually abused, but I did not want to go there. I did not. Long story short, I did some training, and in the training, and we were being trained to work with survivors, sexual abuse survivors, my issues began to come up, and I started working on the sexual abuse. And I will tell you, 12 years later, it took me 12 years to work completely through all the sexual abuse that my father put on me, and mother in a lot of ways, because I think she knew what was happening. And how I could handle it is I would say to myself that my dad always thought I was my mother. Kids make up things to make things right. But anyway, my youngest daughter, Christy, had took a sabbatical from Shades, went to Fort Worth and taught school for a couple of years. That first year, she wanted me to come up and see her classroom, and I eagerly went. I wanted to see her classroom and to meet her supervisor, who was that woman right there in the corner. That was her supervisor, Miss Cam. That's when I got to meet Cam. And anyway, when I got there, I was the one that always gave everybody a book to read. I'd give my husband books to read on alcoholism. I'd give the kids books to read and all. No one ever gave me a book to read, but Christy did. This man that had written the book Driven to Distraction. He was a doctor, a psychologist, and he came to the school to speak. Or they went somewhere and heard him, and Christy got his book, Driven to Distraction, and it was about ADHD, ADD, and ADHD. And Christy gave me the book, and she said, "Mother," and she bought me a book, my own book, and she said, "Mother, would you read this book?" She didn't say what was in it, but when I read it, I read myself on every page. And I diagnosed myself with ADD. Now, as a kid, I did not have the hyperactive type of ADHD. I had the daydreamer type, where you'd look out the window and I would dream, and I would read a book, and if it was about San Francisco, I would be in San Francisco. I mean, that's what took me out of the environment that I was living in. Books, reading, imagination. And thank God for it. So I read the book, and I went to see when I read that, like I said, I read myself on every page of it. And so I went to my primary care physician, and I didn't know that she was sort of the expert. This was early on when they were really looking at ADHD and and adult deficit disorder. And she was the sort of ADHD doctor in Abilene. I didn't know that. And so she said, "I've always thought you had ADD." And I said, "Well, why didn't you diagnose me?" She said, "I don't like to put labels on people. If they, she said, you were highly functioning. You had learned to live within your, within the symptoms that you had." So she set me up to, no, she didn't. what happened was I got to where I couldn't stay awake. I was sleeping. So, long story short, I was sent to Lubbock to do a sleep test. They found out that I had narcolepsy. When I got the book that Christy gave me on adult children of alcoholics, and I found a therapist in Dallas and in Austin to work through those ACOA issues. Guess what? I do not have narcolepsy today. What happens to the brain accommodates the body, it accommodates the behavior. And what had happened, that part of my brain, I slept very little as a child. I still have sleep problems. But there are 2-3 nights a week I can sleep most nights, but most of the time I'm up and down all night. And that's from the sexual abuse. And so when I don't know why I got into all of that, but anyway, children will begin to show different symptoms, and a lot of them will have ADHD. And but when I started working, my point is when I started working on the sexual abuse, and it took me a long time, and I went 30 days treatment down in Florida to a unit down there. I did 5 days, 8 days, 6 days. I'd go up to South Dakota and I did 2 8-day programs. I would have done anything to get well. I don't care what it was. But one day, about 12 years later, I woke up and I thought, I'm done. I've done all the work. I'm finished. I'm complete. And I will tell you, I no longer have narcolepsy. It was not narcolepsy. It was the trauma from the abuse. And when you have that type of trauma, the way that I had and the way a lot of people have, it affects your sleep, it affects your memory, it affects everything. But after 12 years of working on the sexual abuse, and I didn't work on it every minute, I would do 3 or 4 workshops a year because I did not want to live like that anymore. And I don't. I'm free of it today, and I no longer have narcolepsy. Is the point? Okay, so to survive, you instead of simply being children, what happens? We believe that we are the problem. We believe if we got better, that our parent wouldn't drink. If we got better, they wouldn't fuss and fight. And another thing that children who are raised in alcoholism become very hypervigilant. They can read a room like nobody's business because they have been in training for this for years. And in their adult life, they can walk into a room and read. And most adult children of alcoholics can. They can read a room. And they are always scanning for danger, for tension, for anger, for unpredictability. And sometimes, adult children of alcoholics will, because of being a child of an alcoholic, they wouldn't allowed to have anger then, but will grow up and have the rage and anger. So children who live in dysfunction learn to be dysfunctional. Like I said, they begin to believe that they're the problem. And what happens is, sometimes, and I know this is harsh to say, but sometimes physical abuse is not as bad as psychological abuse to a child because they can see the whelps on them. They can see they acted up and they got spanked. But an alcoholic doesn't spank; they whip them, and so will the non-alcoholic. And so those are visible. Those are visible wounds. But what really hurts a child in an alcoholic home are those invisible wounds. They're invisible. And what happens is not all wounds leave bruises. The wounds are inside of us. And children grow up feeling unsafe in a calm environment. I don't care where they are. are hypervigilant, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Struggling with anxiety. Children that are raised in living in active alcoholism have a lot of anxiety, and it can be diagnosable anxiety. If the parents stop their acting out long enough to look at the child and realize it is affecting their children, and unable to trust others, they begin to where they're not trustworthy. They become perfectionists. Children who are raised in alcoholic homes a lot of times start doing things, like I said, that are not age appropriate, and they feel like they don't know what they're doing, so they try to do everything perfect, and they become perfectionists and will bring it into their adult life. And they become people pleasers. And they'll feel emotionally numb. They have no feelings. They just shut those feelings off because there's no payoff for having feelings. Kids who are raised in alcoholic homes, active alcoholism, there's no room for a child to have a problem in active alcoholism. All of the focus goes on the alcoholic, what the alcoholic is doing, and the non-alcoholic is focused on the alcoholic, and so there's a lot of neglect in alcoholic homes of the children. And those invisible wounds, they are deep-seated inside. And then this impact of secrecy, I can't say that enough, because they will, and I told my own kids this, and I don't feel, my family was going to be different. My home was going to be different, and it was from the outside. My house, our house, it was cute. It was a little 2-story. It was, I kept it spotlessly clean. I ran that house like a staff sergeant. There was an American flag out front. There was red geraniums on the porch. We were a looking good family. In fact, we were selected the family of the year one time. I was selected, I've told y'all this, woman of the year. And I felt so guilty because I thought if they only knew what was happening inside our house. Because my husband was what we called a periodic alcoholic. He could go a month without drinking, but if he ever drank, he ordered up a drunk. He'd be gone 3 or 4 days. And then I'd go nuts, and I'd get out and look for him, drag those kids in and out of every bar looking for him. That's what the non-alcoholic does until they get some help. So the grace of the thing that can help children who are in the active disease of alcoholism is for the non-alcoholic to get help. And by the grace of God, I got sick enough. I didn't know about Al-Anon family group. I didn't. But I was young. I married my husband when I was 19, came out of severe alcoholism. And so I was hungry to know something to do, And so I had the privilege of hearing Father Martin. I don't know if any of y'all have ever heard of Father Martin. He is a legend in the alcoholism field. He was a clergyman, but he was an alcoholic himself. And then he developed what he called the chalk talks, and he could explain alcoholism like that a 2-year-old could understand, or a 4-year-old, or kids could understand. He would get up there, he would draw pictures, and I had the privilege, and I can't remember how I found out, but anyway, I went to Midland to hear him. I'd already moved down here. And what he stressed, he didn't stress the alcoholic getting help. What he stressed was the non-alcoholic getting help. The non-alcoholic. Because he said until this chaos in the home stops, the alcoholic will never want to have recovery because they blame it on the non-alcoholic. If I didn't have to live with that bitch, my husband would say this. He'd tell them, if I didn't have to live with that bitch, she hollers and screams all the time, I wouldn't have to drink. And I believed it. That's the thing about the non-alcoholic. We believe everything the alcoholic tells us. And then if it's reversed, I'll tell you, if you have, if a man has an alcoholic wife, you watch the community, you watch the church. If they're involved in anything in the community or involved in the church, people will gather around that man, the non-alcoholic, to help. They will help, and they will help the non-alcoholic man. But you reverse that, and it's an alcoholic man, and the wife is the non-alcoholic. They look down on the woman. Why would she stay with someone like that? I mean, people do not hover around. Church people will not hover around the non-alcoholic. There's no hope and there's no help really offered to the non-alcoholic until they find Al-Anon family group. If there is one person, listen to this somewhere, that's living in the disease of alcoholism, go find you an Al-Anon group. Al-Anon will save your life. I spent 14 years in Al-Anon before my husband ever went to his first AA meeting. And what I learned in Al-Anon was to get off of his back, get out of his way, give him a clear berth to do whatever he needed, get out of his way, get off of his back, and go on with my own life. And I did that. And the children, by that time, they were teenagers. And by that, and so by the time he got sober, we were busy living our lives. And what he said, part of his story was that he was sitting in his easy chair and that we were off living our life, and he could die there in that chair, drinking himself to death, and we'd never know it. But I had to get help myself. And, the sad thing, the alcoholic may not ever get help. They can die of the disease of alcoholism. So if one person can hear me talk about if you're living in active alcoholism, whether it's a man or a woman, go to Al-Anon Family Group. It will save your life. It will save your children's life. It will save your spouse's life, because you won't kill your spouse for drinking. I had violence in my life, and I would have killed my husband, but I would think it through, and I'd think, well, I will go to prison, their dad will be dead, they'll be orphaned. So that's what kept me. I'd hold a pillow over his face many nights, and then finally I'd come to my senses and think, what in the world am I doing? The non-alcoholic gets as sick, if not sicker, than the alcoholic ever thought about being. And this is what children in the disease of alcoholism are living with. Yes, the alcoholic is sick. They are sick. They have a disease. And the non-alcoholic, like I said, gets as sick, if not sicker, than the alcoholic. They're the ones, the non-alcoholic is the ones that have the biggest influence on the children. I hate to say that, but they do. They have the biggest influence on the children. And so they're the ones who teach the children, do not go to school and tell anybody what happened last night in this house, which that meant Dad came home and I beat him up, or we got out and, went to every bar looking. And I still feel shame about that. I'd make the kids go to bed early and they'd say, but it's still light outside, go to bed. I wanted them out of my hair so I could stand at the door and look down the road to watch for him to come home. And then when he'd come home, I'd usually beat him up. This is the sickness of the alcoholism, and this is what the kids get to witness. Not all non-alcoholics get as sick as I did, but a lot of them do, and I've worked with a lot of them. So the non-alcoholic is the one that is telling the children, don't go outside this house and say anything. What happens in this house stays in this house. So silence creates shame. The children began to carry the shame of the disease of alcoholism. They're carrying the shame of it. They take it on. And but I do, and we're only as sick as our secrets. So, what can happen if one parent can start getting healthy? Like I said, I made it to Al-Anon and spent 14 years in Al-Anon. And it saved my life. It saved my kids' lives. It probably saved my husband's life. Because I did get off of his back, got out of his way, and I went on to my own life. I looked around one day and I thought, he may not ever sober up. And I may have to make these kids live it. I had no education. I went back to school thanks to Al-Anon, thanks to a good sponsor in Al-Anon. She walked me through going to school. My kids supported me. They would help me. My son would type up some of my papers for me, So my kids lived in active alcoholism for years and years. But when they get to talking about their childhood, I affected them much more than their dad did, because kids know that the alcoholic is sick. What in the world is wrong with this crazy woman over here? So what happens, recovery can change generations. The disease can change in one generation. That is the hope of recovery. And what happens is when one family member, and it can be a teenager finding his or her way to Alateens. It can be anyone, but it's usually the non-alcoholic. It's usually the non-alcoholic that goes outside the home and finds help first. And they can, a lot of times maybe a minister will recommend it to them. That's kind of something that I like to do in my older life here. I love to go and minister and educate ministers about the disease of alcoholism, because it's usually if they're connected to a church at all, it's usually the non-alcoholic that goes. What are you saying? They are the ones who go to the church for help. They go for church, or the alcoholic will go to church for help when they won't go anywhere else. And if the church isn't educated, I'll tell you, if you're ever in Alexandria, Louisiana, you need to go to, it's called 7. It is a group that they have started for alcoholics and drug addicts. This Pentecostal church, and you can hardly find a vacant chair in that, and it's a big place. It used to be a YMCA where they meet. People are hungry for education. Alcoholics do not want to be sick. They just don't know how not to drink. They don't when they're in the disease. They do not know. They don't know, Yeah, my husband was an alcoholic. I was a compulsive overeater. Here I was eating up everything in the house, could not keep food for my kids' lunches, because I'd get up in the middle of the night and eat everything that I had bought for their lunches, and ate myself up to 287 pounds. So my kids were not living with just one addict, they were living with 2. And I'd have to get up and go out and try to find something for their lunches. This was before stores stayed open 24 hours a night. I'd have to go to the 7-Eleven or something and get, because I would have eaten up their food. So our children were living with 2 addicts in the same house. All right, so let's get them well here. Let's get them healthy. Recovery is about creating safety inside the house. It's about telling the truth. Kids can handle the truth. A lot of parents, and I would do this. I'd tell them, well, your dad's sick. Well, he was. I wasn't lying to him. He was sick, but I was thinking more like he can't go to work today because he's got the flu. Well, in reality, he couldn't go to work because he had a hangover and he was throwing up, and so I'd lie to the kids. But kids are smart, and they pretty well can tell what's going on. But start telling the truth, and start regulating for the non-alcoholic to start regulating their own emotions. And I'm not just picking on the non-alcoholic, because we get, and it's, it's not our fault that the alcoholic drinks. It's not anyone's fault. They have a disease. But I'll tell you, you get one of those parents healthy, just one, then that whole household's going to change. If one parent can step out and start getting help, the household can change. And that's what happened with us. And like I said, I've spent 14 years at Al-Anon before Ariel ever went to his first AA meeting. But surprisingly enough, the chaos stopped. The hollering and screaming stopped. The raging stopped, because I was the one creating the chaos. He just wouldn't come in, sit down, pass out in his easy chair, or, so when a parent heals, whether it's the alcoholic or the non-alcoholic, who benefits is the children. And when the children are supported early, the cycles can be interrupted. The cycle of disease must be interrupted. I mean, it sounds like I'm preaching, but I'll tell you, it is difficult to live in the disease of alcoholism as a child, because you're taught don't go to school and tell what's happening, and so you get to school. I mean, I drive myself to school at age 10. At age 10, I drive an old pickup to school on days that I went, but most of the time, Mother wanted me to stay home with her, and I would. I'd stay home and take care of her. So, and another thing, if you're a neighbor or you're in a church that you know that there's active alcoholism, support that non-alcoholic. Support the non-alcoholic, because you can't do anything about the alcoholic. You cannot until they decide that they want some help. Support that non-alcoholic, because she or he, and there's fathers that have alcoholic mothers that can, alcoholic wives, that he has to get up and go to work and leave his children there with a drunk. And it's a sad situation. I think it's sadder a lot of times for the mother to be alcoholic than the dad. And there's neither one of them is going to win any parenting prizes. They're not. This is a disease. It shows up the most in the house. So I don't know if any of you were a child in an alcoholic home. But if you were, I want you to ask yourself, what messages did you learn as a child living in the disease of alcoholism? And did you feel safe emotionally growing up? Now, what the kicker is to this, children, I don't care how severe the alcoholic is, what the chaos is in the family. The kids want to be in the home. They want to be there with those parents. That's what's familiar. They do not want to be taken out. They do not. I've never seen one yet that wants to be taken out, because for one thing, they have a job there. Every one of those kids have a job, and it's all revolved around, the parents, like, the scapegoat, and I've, we have a little scapegoat. Her name is Kim. Kim is the one that got us help. You'll go get help for a child when you won't get help for yourself. And Kim has given me permission to share that, she was an acting out child. And so I started taking her to therapy when she was very young, a little kid, and we went, and he would say, what you need to do is take her back to school and you come back. And I would say, yes, but her father's the alcoholic. Yes, but you're the one coming, so you come back. So Kim and I are the ones who started getting help at first. And we got help for a long time. And I'm grateful, but it's that scapegoat, because when Kim would begin to act out, it would bring me and my husband together. And that's the job of the scapegoat, is to bring the parents together, because they will come together to figure out what to do with the scapegoat, whether to bail them out of jail or leave them there, or to whatever's happening. If they're failing in school, the parents come together. Even if there's active alcoholism, they will come together to see if they can get help for the scapegoat. So, all right. Just ask yourself, did I feel safe emotionally growing up? Was I allowed to express feelings? Did I become responsible for adults' emotions too early? Am I creating emotional safety for the children in my life today? And the hope of, children are the most resilient little creatures in the world, and children are the most forgiving. And this is what the hope is. When the parents begin to heal, now a lot of times the kids won't like it. For instance, the son has been paying the bills. He's been, stepping up and being the man of the house. Maybe the dads, I've already mentioned this, maybe he's gone for months. The father's gone for months in treatment. He comes home, he wants to take over the job as head of the house. The son does not want to turn it loose. And because he doesn't want to turn over paying the bills, because he's felt grown up doing that, and him and the mother have become partners, not sexual partners. Well, sometimes that happens, but it's partners in running that household. Or you've got a daughter that has taken over, the housekeeping. They've taken over a lot of the cooking. They take over a lot of taking care of the younger kids, because the non-alcoholic is so focused on the alcoholic, she can't even function. So as the parents begin to get help and begin to be parents, a lot of times these children are lost because they've had definite jobs inside those homes, and they feel left out when they, and I know when I took my mother to Big Spring State Hospital, I drove her the first time I was 13, which was 65 miles from Odessa. And I drove her over there. 13 years old, didn't have a license, that didn't matter. When when you're a child of an alcoholic, you get away with that. You have to do things. It's not age appropriate. But I was, weighed about 230 then, so I looked like a grown person. And I remember that social worker, when she was checking Mother in, she, they took her false teeth away from her. They took all of her jewelry away from her. They stripped her of her citizenship. I hope to God they do not do that today. They stripped her of everything in that mental hospital. All of it was returned, even her citizenship. But then that social worker looked over at me, and I remember her patting me on the hand, and she said, "Now, honey, you go home with your friends and you live your life, and you go home and have some fun, because we're going to take care of your mother. And you live your life." And I wanted to tell her, she is my life. I have no life other than my mother. None. I had no friends. I had no outside activities. I went to school very little. This is the extreme of alcoholism, and where children began to be the caretakers. I had an older sister that was already married. She escaped when she was 16 and got married. And she was, would give me a little bit of relief every once in a while, but she was so jealous of me and mother. Anyway, there's the dynamics in an alcoholic home are horrendous, the family dynamics. So the thing about it is, sobriety can heal the entire family, but the children need help as much as the parents do. Don't leave them out. And what children deserve healthy homes. They deserve healthy homes filled with safety. They need to know it's safe in their own home. They need to be told the truth. They need stability. Children need to know that when they go to school, when they come home, things are going to basically be the same. when you're living the disease of alcoholism, you never know what you're going to walk into ever as a kid. You don't know if you're going to be picked up at school or who's going to pick you up. You don't know. And, you know, there is, in recovery, there's perseverance. I mean, they're taught perseverance. That's one thing that kids coming out of alcoholic homes learn is perseverance. They learn to keep on keeping on. And that's a good quality to have unless you run it into the ground taking care of an alcoholic. And so they deserve homes filled with love. And there's a lot of times that there's a lot of love in alcoholic homes. But then there, you know, one of the alcoholic will get drunk, they'll get in a fight, and it just cancels out all of those loving feelings that the parents have had the day before, you know. So children deserve to live in safety. They deserve to be loved. Children may not remember every word spoken in a home, but they will remember how that home made them feel. They remember the feelings in the home. They may not remember the words spoken, but they will remember the feelings in the home. And I can remember the feeling. I mean, right now I can remember, because when I walked in that house, it was like doom and gloom. But anyway, don't forget the children. And sometimes working in the disease of alcoholism, we forget those younger children at home. We do. And they need help. And because I had gone through it with my own children, you know, it made me more aware of children that we would have at the Serenity House. And it was years ago, and there wasn't money available through the state to get them much help. But that's where kids need their own help. They need to see therapists themselves. They need to learn, and not a lot of therapy. They need a lot of freedom to be kids, freedom to play, freedom not to have the responsibility. So, alrighty, that's what I have about little kids living in alcoholic homes. If you know of a situation like this, you can't change it. But what you can do, you can be a friend to those kids. You can be friends, you can be friendly to them. You can do what you can to help those kids. All right, what do y'all have? Any of you lived in alcoholic homes? Did it break